Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast version, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found at miamighostchronicles.com. You can also find information about my talk show appearances and any new book projects at marlenepardo.com, or go to Amazon and look up my author profile as Marlene Pardo Pellicer. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and also listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, and of course Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests as we talk about the mysteries of the unexplained. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy theories, and just about anything that is plain weird, you can visit Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing today? Good, I hope. I'm doing good, considering everything. And I know, I stagger the show a little bit, but I'm sure that by the time you guys hear this, we're going to still be on the same page, which is, we're still under the effects of COVID, regardless of where you are in the United States. Every state's got a different, but we're all there. We're all there. And so, again, I'm well. Mine are doing well. When I say mine, my people, my family. I'm being forced to do more farm work than I would like to, because what else is there to do? I mean, in other words, I don't have excuses. The procrastinator in me doesn't have a good excuse not to do something that I'm dragging my butt on. And of course, we're in the middle here of rainy season in South Florida, which, like you all know, because of my trees, the 100 and some trees, is fabulous. But my lawn and the weeds, and as Dr. Malcolm from Jurassic Park said, life finds a way. Boy, does it find a way. It's like a jungle. I mean, I mow, and then it's like, I come out 2 days later, and it's like, wait a minute. So yeah, super busy, super hot, super humid, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And of course, all my chickens and everybody's doing fine. My dogs, even my dogs are thinking, why is she spending so much time at home? So, yeah. But anyway, guys, and I hope that when you hear this, you are all doing well. But let's get to the good part. The good part, is what or who, is here tonight. And I know you're all going to be very excited, especially if you are a dragon enthusiast. And the name of tonight's guest is Shawn MacKenzie. She has been a freelance editor for over 20 years and a writer far longer. She is the author of 2 scholarly works on the science, myth, and lore of dragons around the world. She has the following books issued by Llewellyn: The Dragon Keeper's Handbook and Dragons for Beginners, issued in 2011 2012. She's a graduate of Bennington College, a transplanted Vermonter, an avid student of myth, religion, philosophy, and animals, real and imaginary, great and small. And her short stories have been anthologized in South Shire Pepperpot, Skyline Review, and is a winner of the Shire's Press Award for Short Stories, to name a few. She's currently working on a short story collection and a novel about myth, magic, and chinchillas in the high Andes. We got to ask her about that. But anyway, help me to welcome her. How are you doing today, Shawn?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for inviting me. I should add to that, it's a little out of date. I've got a third dragon book out called Llewellyn's Little Book of Dragons, which just came out.
Okay.
Just came out this year. And I'm also working on a brand new Dragon Tarot deck with Llewellyn, which will be coming out I'm in the future. So that's kind of taking precedence right now. But anyway.
Okay, but is that going to be out for 2020, or you don't know yet?
That will be out either the end of next year or the beginning of 2022.
Okay, see, Marlene's like, yeah, okay, I know what you mean. That as far as sometimes those things take a while to get actually going through all the process as far as to be on the market.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's super interesting. A dragon tarot. Wow. But I'm going to ask you, Shawn, what I ask all my guests, how did you get interested in this field of dragons?
Oh. Back way back. When I was a kid, I was like 4 or so. There was this wonderful used bookstore in St. Paul. I grew up in Minnesota, and we used to go to the bookstore, and I found this marvelous book called The Dragon Green by this woman, J. Bissell Thomas. It was a British book, and it was about this wonderful, eccentric, spiky, wikey, courageous, silly dragon, right? Who falls in love with the princess, and all sorts of things happen to him. Defeats a witch, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that was probably my first connection to dragons, way back then. And they always have fascinated me ever since. I think as I've grown up and read about dragons and studied them, I've always felt that they got a terrible rap, as it were. They really got short shrift.
Right. Because they could be heroic, but I've seen them play the villain part a lot, also. Yeah,
especially in the West. Where religion kind of took them over as a symbol of evil and so on and so forth. Not so bad in the East. In Asia, the Chinese and Japanese dragons, they were treated much better.
Right.
But in the West, we did not treat them very well. It's changing, I think, with contemporary fiction. They're becoming a little more nuanced, a little more three-dimensional, and that's good. It's about time,
Right. Yes, they've developed. They've developed. I know what you're saying as far as personalities for certain characters, and they weren't intent on burning everything down or eating people or eating virgins or what, because usually they've made them or that they're under some type of or a reason why they're the way they are, in other words.
Yeah. But they're a fascinating creature because from the beginning, from even when they were these cosmic creatures, through their literary and cinematic incarnations, they're sort of these empty vessels that the author or the filmmaker or the philosopher or the priest, whoever, can kind of they need to at the time. If they need a great dragon who is the giver of rain, you got a great dragon who gives rain. If you need a villain, or a guardian or whomever, you can fill that space with a dragon.
Yes.
So they are definitely at the subject to the tyranny of the author or the creator who happens to be using them at the time.
Right, exactly. Even if, and I know we had talked about, different things as far as in literary dragons, sometimes they're the main character, and sometimes, like you said, they're used to fill in a certain void, like I said before, to be the villain or the guardian of something, or whatever maybe needs to be propelled on. Let me ask you, because I've always thought about this, and I know you made the reference to Western versus, Asian, and I'm always thinking, because the imagery of dragons has been around for a long time, and you think, what was the origins of dragons? How far back is that? Have you ever come across that information?
Well, you've got your great cosmic dragons, which go back to creation stories all around the world. That's another thing about dragons. I mean, every culture in every continent has some dragon story or connected to it. You've got the great sovereign plumed serpent in Mexico and Central America. You've got the great five-toed dragons in China, who were part of the cosmic creation, and a bunch of littler, lesser-known ones in a more tribal sense around the world. So they go way back. In China, they go back easily 3,000 to 4,000 years before the Common Era, as it were.
Let me ask you: do you? Because I'm always thinking, is it coincidental that the imagery of dragons resembles dinosaurs in a way? That I was thinking. I always wondered: did some ancient civilization uncover a complete skeleton? Where did they draw on this?
Well, there was in before paleontology became known as we know it today. Back in the let me get this right. 18th. Dinosaur bones were being up in China, and since there was no notion of, I love your birds. There was no notion of dinosaurs per se,
right?
But there was a sense of dragons. Dragons had a place in Chinese culture. You dig up these wonderful, big, huge bones.
Right. Yes, that's exactly what I think of. I've thought of that. Maybe they came across some animal, a dinosaur that was completely whole, I guess is what I'm referring to.
The Gobi Desert and places like that were just littered with dinosaur bones. Right. So it became a natural part of the mythology and
right, because I've often wondered, because and I'm thinking most people think of your typical paleontologist as in the modern time. When I say modern, by comparison to ancient civilizations, I'm thinking, any of these places they could have uncovered somehow or other, or if you had let's say a mudslide or something uncovered that had been hidden, and it might have been a complete skeleton, of an animal that maybe got buried instantly, not.
Well, you think Archaeopteryx, this wonderful little winged dinosaur, to people who come from a dragon-centric culture, oh, this is just a baby dragon.
Right.
You know? Maybe it was. It is.
Right.
I mean,
everybody always thinks of small as in baby, like, or a young one, in other words.
But there are all kinds. That's another thing. I mean, dragons. The culture of dragons, they go from very small to, of course, huge dragons that one thinks of as dragons.
Right.
But there are little guardian dragons and household dragons that are part of folklore and mythology all over the world. And you know, they hang out in your garden and they love omelets and cozy places by the fire, and this is part of dragon culture as well, and they're no bigger than a house cat.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because you always think of, and they've usually been characterized as very large or big. In other words, winged, fire breathing. In a lot of cases, yeah, and that tradition of making them in many sizes is something that I'm glad to see came about versus it always being this huge dragon, which people were mostly afraid of, even if it wasn't unfriendly, but people were like very careful because of that dragon. And then once they gave him, how can I say it, dragons that actually spoke, how's that? With a personality versus the ones that would just fly and swoop around and, you know, everybody would just run and duck for cover. You know, you had the ones that, because they spoke, they developed personalities and you heard their story, whatever it was, and things like that. I loved, you know, when I see stories go in that direction.
Yeah, I like to think of well, I've written a whole stories, and most of my dragon fiction has the dragons are very articulate. So,
Right.
Because it's they may not always be understood by the, but that's the human feeling to the dragon's feeling. I mean, not all people speak dragon. That's just
right.
Right. But it's I like to think of them as these complete creatures who are complex and have complex lives and social lives and how they the world around them. And I think as people we can learn a lot from them, I think.
I remember, you know, because I've always been an avid reader, and I want to say, was it the 70s or 80s when the series came out, the Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey.
Wonderful.
You know, that you saw that relationship between the human being and the dragon, you know.
Yeah.
That's one of the earliest examples that I can really think of where it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't portrayed as a monster. I'm sure maybe there was earlier stories, but that's the one that comes to mind where I think a lot of people started falling in love with dragons, in other words, beyond.
Oh, yeah. And there was a wonderful thing about those in that she took the human mythology of a dragon and these people who landed on this planet created the dragons. I mean, genetically modified the creatures that were there and connected them to a human mythology.
Right.
They turned them into dragons that we people could relate to, because that was what was needed to fight. Also, it made sense. You know, it was making myth real.
Right.
You know, which was wonderful. I thought those were marvelous books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those were like the earliest, you know, that came to mind. As far as that whole the whole story of dragons, it took a turn, you know, like, okay, let's make them part of in other words, they were the central. I mean, yes, you had the central human character, but the dragons were just as important.
Yeah.
As the central figures in the stories.
Yeah, they weren't just obstacles in the way who had to be slain or whatever. Yeah, they were very integral to the tales. Before that, I mean, you had a few, but they were mostly kids' stories, like My Father's Dragon and things like that. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, who both professed a great love for dragons, they kept their dragons kind of in the old mold of the bad guys. Especially Tolkien. I mean, C.S. Lewis,
yeah,
the Voyage of the Dawn Treader in the Narnia books, when Eustace turns into a dragon, being a dragon makes him a better person. So the dragon isn't, strictly speaking, a bad guy. And then there are the Paralandria dragons who are just kind of, I mean, they're space dragons, so that's a whole different world sort of thing.
Right, because I mean, in the most recent, what was it? One of the, you know, the dragon Smog, you know, that you see in the trilogy or the movie stuff that they put out for The Hobbit, you know, or you know, that obviously it's a very powerful dragon, but it's motivated by greed, is what you see.
When you think about it, if the dwarves had left Smaug alone, would he have done what? I mean, there's always a way to turn it.
Right, exactly. But
he had his stuff. Yeah.
They made it sound like he wasn't, but which, by the way, I love the actor who they used to voice Smaug. What's his name?
Yeah,
Cumberbatch. Yeah, it's like I have, as a matter of fact, about 3-4 years ago, they in Home Depot of all places they had a dragon phone. Did you know that they bring? And it has. I'm sure it's not him. But the phone is an actual dragon, and it's modeled like one of those old-time phones, but it's an actual dragon. And when you pick it up, you hear the voice of the dragon telling you all this great stuff with that voice. I have it permanently outside. They sold it originally as a Halloween prop. I have it on. I have it on one of my end tables next to a sofa, and it lights up, and people get a real kick out of it. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah. That's just me. It's and in a way, I'm glad I got it because I never saw them bring it back as during the Halloween times. It's almost like they did it that one year and that was it. And I said, I'm gonna take this just in case. And sure enough, I've never seen it again come out with it's a very unusual and it lights up, and like I said, the voice and everything, and it's like. Excellent. It's got really great recordings. Let me and like you mentioned now, I mean, you know, as far as let's say science fiction and fantasy novels and everything, I've seen the development of dragon characters integrated into all these storylines or these universes. How's that?
Much more so than they used to be. Yeah. And I think also we're getting beyond the very basic sort of sword and sorcery
right
kind of stuff, which is fun. It shows that people are, thinking bigger, which I like. I haven't read as much modern dragon stuff as I probably should, or as I want to. But I keep waiting for it on a quasi-literary, but on a cinematic scale. Mm-hmm. With the advent of what can be done with CGI these days, I really keep waiting for a wonderful, beautifully rendered dragon story on film, and there really aren't many. I mean, there's a marvelous Russian film called I Am Dragon, which is almost a fairy tale kind of thing, very Beauty and the Beast.
I think
Eros
is that.
Sort
let
of.
me ask you something. I'm thinking, is that one? There's one I saw, and I know it was an independent film out of Europe, and maybe that's it, where he transforms. He's a dragon, and he's cursed on an island. Is that it?
Yes, the island looks like a dragon skull.
Yes. Oh my God, what a great movie that was. I love that film.
That's a beautiful film. But, most of the films are just kind of prosaic. Dragons deserve something more than prosaic, I think. They deserve something wonderful. The dragons in Game of Thrones, they did really well with those, but again, they as spectacular as they were. In many ways, they were props to the rest of the story. It wasn't their story. So I still love the scene when Tyrion went down and released the dragons from the dungeon. That was just wonderful.
Right.
And I yelled at the screen when Dany locked them up, because how dare she? You do not lock up their dragons. You just don't do that.
Well, even with which one was the one from J.K. Rowling? I forget which one is it. The one where they have the dragon chained up, guarding.
Oh, in guarding the gold in the bank.
And
yes.
I lose track of which one it is. If it was Goblet of Fire or, after a while, you lose track of which one specifically had that scene. But yeah, it was very you feel so sorry for that dragon in there, and that they get it out of there. They set it free. And then I know in her storyline she mentions that there's different breeds of dragons and that they're free. There's a place where they belong, or a habitat where they belong to, that they're free.
Right.
But again, they're like a side thing. Over here in Disney World in Orlando, they have an actual dragon-sized statue of a dragon. Of the Harry Potter. They have those themed parts of the park, and where they have the Harry Potter part, I guess we want to call it. They've actually put the dragon size, by the way, clinging to the side of the building. That the first time I saw it, I was like, I must have stood there 30 minutes just looking at it, and every once in a while breathes fire, and I'm like, oh my God, that was this is the best. I mean, after a while, when you've gone to some of these parks, the wow factor is not there anymore. Well, yeah, I got my wow factor back then, right then and there, when I saw this, because that was great. That was for lack of a better word, it was breathtaking what they did with that.
Dragons have that wow factor. I mean, real big, kick-ass dragons.
Yeah.
air breathing, wings flapping. I mean, they have that woof sense of wonder that makes your jaw drop, and I think that also is one of the things that fascinates people about them. You know, it's like, they should be in this world because they are so spectacular, you know. And you want to see them flying across the mountains or out over the sea, you know, because that's where they belong.
Right, and not necessarily in characters where they're subservient, you know, to humans. In other words, or
they are wild, you know. They are the wild personified, and we need that. I think we really need that, especially as human beings keep pushing the wilderness back and stomping on it. We need that reminder of what wild is.
Right, exactly that. And of course, the imagination is. Because if you know, sometimes I stop and think, okay, what if they did exist? What if, you know, everybody, what if, you know, would we be able to coexist with them? What if all of a sudden we saw a dragon in the sky, you know, like, you know, how everybody's always having, you know, this thing about extraterrestrials and UFOs. What if all of a sudden, what was that movie? And I know in this one they portrayed dragons very negatively. What was it? Rain of Fire, where you know they do the drilling, and all of a sudden they discover dragons, and dragons decimate everything. But something along the lines of basically we have a world without dragons, and then we have a world with dragons. Yeah, you know, I always think, okay, how would this work? Would it, if it was something gradual that we had from ancient times, or how would it happen if all of a sudden you look up and there's a dragon and it's like, what? You know, how would we handle it? Because I think we all have a problem with something, even if it doesn't want to, that can eat us. How's that?
I worry we wouldn't handle it well, just because.
Probably not.
Yeah, which is a problem, but. At the same time, I also think, in an abstract sense, a world without dragons is so much less. You know, just without the idea of dragons.
Right.
You know, the idea of dragons, whether they are, you know, walking down Main Street or wherever, they make us better people somehow, I think.
Right. Well, if you think of about the closest thing that I could think of that kind of also relates, even though it wasn't dragons per se, it was the Jurassic Park films, which is like something huge, something that basically intrudes that existed at one point, and you could tell it didn't do humans. And they didn't do well, you know. In other words, we almost got stomped out of existence or eaten. You know, it was like, So in other words, it makes you wonder, you know, if it was something that we would have said, okay, developed with humankind as far as it was a normal thing. And people just handled it because it was part of the environment, just like let's say whales. Oh yeah, dragons. Yeah, they've always been around.
Who knows what's under the sea? I mean, how much of the oceans have we even begun to explore? There are great possibility of sea dragons.
Yes, that's another thing. We have a whole history of sea dragons or sea monsters in some cases, but they have a very comparable. That they look almost the same, except of course, you know, we're talking, And they've always, of course, they've always been portrayed. I want to say even more so than air dragons, as more negatively, as in they want to like wreck things and any people.
Yeah, again, I think that's culturally largely a Western construct. I mean, in Japan, for example, the king of the sea dragons he's very important to the culture because he helps with the fishing, and fishing, of course, very essential to any of the Pacific cultures there. But yeah, I mean, who knows?
Yes, right.
You know, you know, leviathans and so on.
And you always almost also, you know, most times, most dragons are portrayed as having a much longer lifespan than human beings, in other words. And I'm thinking of them also sometimes as being the repository of history.
Oh yeah.
Way, of the you know, I've been around so long.
Very long memories.
Right.
Yes.
I know history because I was around when, you know, your great-great-grandparents or something, whatever, weren't around. So you always think also that some aspects of them are that. And also the, you know, the reproduction, you know, do they lay eggs, you know, do they hatch, you know, other little dragons, like in Game of Thrones, you know, that she's considered the mother of dragons because she, you know, she takes them over from basically since birth. So it's always like, I think it's very interesting, you know, what they use as the genesis for the dragon story, whatever it is, or the dragon character.
Well, there are all kinds of ways you can go. My personal belief is that dragons come from a very natural reptilian or quasi-reptilian source, and they lay eggs, and they have societies, as it were, family structure, and they are connected to the seasons in terms of mating and laying and hatching and so on and so forth, and raising the little ones. That's my personal view. That's my personal sort of concept of dragons, and I dare someone to tell me I'm wrong.
Right, and it makes sense though if you want to look at, like you said, from the reptilian aspect, because of course of how they look.
Yeah, and then you add into it, the eggs need fire to hatch. It helps. It anneals the shell so it cracks and the little ones dragons can get out. Things like that. But they are part of the natural world in my way of thinking. Right.
Right, that they're not like I said, if we could pretend that they had always been around, like, you know, elephants and whales, and they were just part of our environment, you know, like, it wouldn't be unusual to have, just like if you see you know, well, you know how people now go see you know, whale sighting or whale spotting. I don't know what you call it exactly. That would be something like, let's go to the coast of so and so. The dragons will be flying by, migrating, you know, or something like that.
There are sanctuaries all around the world. You just have to know where they are, you know.
Yeah, exactly. That you always see them as as you know, they have their place and we have ours. But I think a lot of people have made their you know, we commented on. They've been put into so many different storylines, either as heroes or villains or verbal or, you know, nonverbal, as in, you know, oh, you know, run, it's the dragon, you know, or God, what was that one? There was one that I can't remember right now that I want to say Sean Connery played the voice for the dragon.
Oh, Dragonheart.
Right. Dragonheart. Yes.
That was lovely.
Yeah.
It was fun.
They give them these personalities, which I think is the most interesting. That those are the dragon characters that I like.
Yes.
That they have their own interests. They have their own agendas, in other words. And it's not necessarily having to help the humans. You know, one of those deals. I think that, and again, it because I think, looking at it in literary terms, that I'm always wondering, you know, where. I mean, like I told you, I foreshadowed a dragon character in one of my stories that, like, a very short little foreshadowing, you know, like, it was like, I'm going to do something on this later, and I'm going to throw this little tidbit out there. And my dragon is going to be, because my character is going to go into another dimension, like a parallel universe kind of deal. And where dragons are, like, commonplace, in other words. So I can do whatever I want in this world.
Wonderful.
Versus, yeah, I'm going to drag, you know, the dragon into this reality. No, I'm going to change reality to fit the dragon. And, you know, I'm debating, you know, you always think of, you know, when you start the creative process, let's say, and of a dragon story, or that the world that you build, I don't know, around, because that's really where you have to go with this, especially when you're starting from scratch, where you could go wherever you want with this.
Yeah.
Even if you want to make it Earth-like or not Earth-like, or what are the rules of this world, or, you know, how are your characters, you know, what is this? Are we at the, and I'm always,
as long as they have a logic, an internal logic, they tend to work, I think.
Right. And you want to make it consistent. And I'm thinking, I've even thought of, should we have, just like people, good dragons and you know, in other words, friendly ones, unfriendly ones, ones that are, you know, in other words, just the same thing as that sometimes drives human beings, as in, you know, somebody's done you wrong, and now, you know, you're not happy with humans, you know, like, in other words, not making them totally, like, be wanting to help. Maybe they've had a bad experience with humans, or, you know, whatever the case might be. I'm still working that out. You know, it's like you try that on for size, and you're like, okay, but no, you know. So,
if you look at dragons as if they're any other species, I mean, you look at cats, for example.
Yes.
Some cats are very friendly. Mm-hmm. Some cats will, you know, scratch your hands off, and they're like people in that way, in terms of past experiences, and how that feeds into the creatures that they become, right? And I like to think dragons are kind of that same way, that nature and nurture go to play into their characters as well. So,
right.
Yeah.
I've even debated, like, what size am I going to make these dragons? Am I going to be the monolithic, you know, or am I going to scale them down to make them more
accessible?
More accessible, yes. Like, the in other words, it wasn't like this thing that everybody's afraid of, or that is just towering. And I mean, maybe for, like you said, for movie effects, it's great. You know what I'm saying? But I think for relationships, it's like I would rather have. I'm leaning more towards a smaller scale dragon.
Yeah.
That's
can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah, it's like, my dragon, which I only use because I can ride it because I'm holding out to its neck and I'm just like a speck on it. You know, it's like, okay. All right. That kind of limits you to, I'd rather have more of a one-on-one relationship with a dragon. So I'm seriously leaning towards scaling the dragon down. Still impressive, but, smaller. More, hey, we can have a conversation and you're not going to be booming in over my head, versus, okay, let's just, let's have a dialogue between my character, one which happens to be human and the other one's a dragon, and they can actually be whispering stuff to one another, that kind of deal, if I wanted to, so yeah, those are the kind of things that float around in my head, and also, and I'm sure maybe you thought of this because you referred the colorings of dragons. As far as not necessarily have to be just strictly reptilian, as in greenish or some traditional colors.
Yeah, I mean you have. I think my take on color in dragons has to do with environment and diet.
Right.
That those are the things that your forest dragons would be greens and browns. Your mountain dragons would probably be grays and whites, things like that. Your water dragons, of course, would be blues and teals and so on. And then what dragons eat affects the minerals and so on that dragons take in would affect how their scales change. At your
right, yeah. We have a bearded dragon named Henry, and I've seen the different colors that affects him depending on what he's been eating, and if he's getting his sun, because we because of our weather we can put him outside instead of a heat lamp. We have a place for him outside, which he loves. And we only bring him in if it gets really, the weather, not that common, but gets too cold or there's just really inclement weather. Then we have a regular cage, and he'll look at us over the side of the cage. And everybody here talks to Henry. It's like in the morning, he kind of goes to sleep at night, and then in the morning I see him pop his head out, especially if I brought him in. And it's like, okay, Henry, I'm going to take you out in just a minute. Okay, hold on. And
how much being stuck under a heat lamp? That's wonderful.
Well, no, we once upon a time, and I said, well, why would we? Let's give him real sun. And what we did was we got a big giant parrot cage. And we made it, and I made him like a little cloth canopy, so if you needed a little bit of shade. So he's outside with 80-degree something weather that we have here a lot. It's heated. In other words, he doesn't need a heat lamp. He's got the sun and a little bit of shade. And the only time we bring him in, like I said,
it's cool.
For some reason he can't be. But I know what you mean as far as I look at his colors based on what we give him to eat. And of course they all have their own, like either yellowish, brownish, reddish. Some of these bearded dragons will change depending on how they were born. But yeah, I know what you mean. But he's and he just looks at you with those eyes that are like, and like I said, everybody in the household talks to Henry like Henry understands you. So I'm gonna use a lot of the inspiration for this bearded dragon for the that stare gaze that they give you, and then they blink and they look at you, like, and you're like, hey, Henry. And sure enough, when I wake up in the morning, he looks up because we have like a little cage in here, and you see him look at me like, I'm ready to go outside now. So, I'm planning to draw on that because that's about the closest thing I have to a dragon is a bearded dragon.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you a lot.
Yeah, the mythology. Well, might as well integrate as much as I can. The mythology, I think, is ever evolving. Even though I know there's a lot of tropes out there circulating as far as the dragon story.
Yeah,
I always am hoping that even those are good. That we're going to be seeing new ones or improvements or using what's there, but then taking it, just changing it up a little bit so that you say, wow, I had not thought of that before. That kind of like approach. And, we could, because, there's always a setting of here, Earth, as an Earth-like versus a totally different world. Are we off-world? Are we, whether it's fantasy or space as in another world? Hey, we landed on this new planet, and guess what? Dragons are all over the place. How do we, things of that nature. And let me ask you, what do you think of, and I know that they've thrown this out there, of like a dragon-human mind meld, like a mental telepathy thing?
Well, I'd say dragons are probably better at it than we are.
Right. Like almost like that they something that you look at it from, not that they do it with everybody. In other words, that there has to be a special relationship between them and
they're very intuitive. They're quite literally old souls in the sense of, and so that they get stuff that people don't, and they can read people in ways that I don't think we're very good at always. Right. Some of us are, but
well, I in the way I see it, I think that's like one of the things that a lot of humans would want. Let's say, and I'm going to use dogs as pets. I mean, that as much as that you could actually be so close to a being that's not a human, even though humans can't do telepathy either, but that you could actually communicate without having to talk. And you always think there has to be a certain degree of closeness, of integration.
Definitely,
for that to occur. Whether it's actual communication or the ability, like an empath, where
definitely an empathic thing. I'm sure. I mean, I see that with a couple of my cats who are they know. I'd like to say they know what I'm thinking, or whatever. But they connect in that way that we don't have to talk to each other.
Yes.
They're just
I mean, I've had pets all my life. I've had cats. I've had dogs. I have cats, and they stayed with my son in his house, and I have 10 dogs. So, I mean, I know that there's talk about a wide range of personality. Whoever says animals don't have personalities is like, sure,
Never been around them if they'd say that.
Yeah, and by the way, not necessarily from birth, because one of the last 3 I added were puppies from the same mom. In other words, there was nobody put their finger in this. They all have their personalities. They all have their personalities, and and you develop a relationship with them depending on the personality style, and they when I wake up like, oh, I think I need to sit down first. Like, they're like, okay, let's leave her alone for a little bit. She's like, she needs to drink some tea first or something like that, versus other times I get up and I'm like, oh, I got to do this and I got to do that. And they're like, all right, we're going outside, versus she's in slow mo today. Everybody lies next to me and waits for me to like speed up. So yeah, animals, they I mean, as far as that, yes, absolutely. I've seen that. I've seen that with things, and as far as dragon, and like I said, that requires a degree of closeness.
Yes.
That.
With dragons, it requires a degree of belief. I went to a grade school nearby and to talk about dragons a while back, and the librarian, it was being held in the library, and the librarian came up to me before I started, and she said, "Don't tell them dragons are real."
Oh, really?
They're going to ask him, "Please don't tell them dragons are real." And there was this look on her face, like like she'd mentioned I was coming, and this was the question that came up, or whatever. And I said, well, I can't promise anything.
Right.
And the first question the kids asked was, hands went up, and they said, "So are dragons real?" And I said, "Sure they are." And this poor librarian was, I probably made her week miserable. But, but it takes a sense of belief,
Yes.
to even start to get to a closeness of connecting with be they dragons, be they cats, be they dogs or parrots or whoever it may be, and you have to have that sense of belief.
Right.
There.
And one of the I was thinking, what was the name? And I remembered one of those early stories that I remember, which I loved, was the one, The Dragon and the George, and that was like, I want to say it was like in the 70s. This is when I was a teenager, which I loved that book. I read that book. It was one of those paperbacks that you pick up, and it was like, well, let's see what this is about. But I was so fascinated with the way that the premise of the story. How's that?
Yes.
Because it just took that's what I'm talking about when you read a story that goes at an angle with the thing of the dragon. This was totally different.
Yeah.
One
of the stories in my new book is the dragon from Beowulf.
Oh, really?
But it's taking the Beowulf. It's taking it from the dragon's perspective. The dragon's telling the story, so we get her perspective on things.
Isn't that great? I love that. Where you take characters that usually are on the sidelines or they're just there somewhere in the background.
Yeah.
And when you put it according to them, sometimes it's like the same story but a whole different reality.
Exactly. It's like, what? She was just sitting there in her cave, and these guys come in and steal her stuff. So, she's protecting her space. If it was a person, they'd have consider it was the right thing to do. But, she's a dragon, so.
Yes, exactly. And I love that. I love when characters and again, it's like a well-known story that everybody thinks this. They know the story. How's that? The story. Yeah. And it's like everything, something happens, witnessed by different people, then you go and you interview them, and everybody says the same thing, but interprets it different, or they're affected by it differently.
Exactly.
And I think that's great. That's fantastic. Because of course, it's like, well, that's the story you heard, but let me tell you my story, or the real story, or in some cases that character is aware of certain things that were happening, or motivations, like you said, which have them act a certain way or behave a certain way. That may be seen through the eyes of the other characters. It's like either aggressive or wrong or whatever, unless you get the backstory. Yeah.
Well, if you look at dragon fairy tales and so on, especially around Europe, various places, like there was a dragon near Krakow, who legend has it had this cave above there was a river. I'm pretty sure there was a river. I'll get this right. And these people moved in and they wanted to build their city, and so they had to get rid of the dragon. Well, the dragon had been there a whole lot longer than they had, I mean, this was an old dragon. He'd been there for hundreds of years. But this sense of what? Eminent domain or manifest destiny, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. People move in and turn the dragons into the bad guys. And you got to get rid of the dragons because the dragons have prime real estate,
Yeah. I've heard that. You've heard, there's some version of it. You can't, you got to make a villain if you want to do something bad to them.
Yep. And then that's the way the story gets handed down. And those stories have to be retold. It's,
right. Which a lot of times, by the way, is, what is it? Truth is stranger than fiction. Where something gets retold so many times that it actually becomes the truth when it really wasn't the truth originally. It's just like this is the story, and we're all gonna stick to it. And then before everybody, absolutely. I think that if there was a way that we could do, that hot tub time moment travel in history thing, we'd stumble across a lot of instances that was like, you mean that's what really happened? Yeah, that's what really happened. And but putting the dragons into the dragon character, and of course, depending on what the story is, I think I love that aspect of it. And to me, let me ask you that you mentioned at the beginning that you're going to be doing the Dragon Tarot, okay?
Yeah.
Which I think is great. You're going to be doing like the full. Is it a certain amount of cards, or how many cards are going to go into it? And
it's a full deck.
Full deck. Okay.
Full deck. I'm writing the book for it and did the concept for it, and my skills do not extend to artistic the graphic arts, but we have a wonderful young artist from Turkey named Firat Solhan, who is doing the artwork, and they're just stunning. They're going to be wonderful, and coming up from Llewellyn, and soon. I mean, not immediately, but in a while.
Right. No. I know that, like that. From start to finish, there's a lot of things, like you said, that whether it's the artwork, illustration. Let me ask you, interpretation wise, are you going to be giving it? You know how some tarots depends if they're upside down, for example. Are you going to be giving it some type of negativity, or is it strictly an interpretation of that one card?
Yeah. My approach is the way I've been reading tarot cards for about 40 years.
Okay.
So I'm taking it from my view on it, which is that I don't use reverse cards.
Okay.
And I figure dragons have enough energy as it is and are complex enough as it is that you really don't need to invert them. That just winds up being clutter.
Okay.
But they're largely based on the Rider-Waite deck,
Right.
an offshoot, but they're all dragon centric. I think there are maybe 2 or 3 cards that even have a person in them, so they're very dragon centric cards. And my take on the tarot is that they elucidate as opposed to foretelling.
Okay.
That they clarify what somewhere deep down we already know, but
yes, right, exactly.
It's lost in either the day-to-day confusion of life or just whatever's going on in our heads, and that then you use the tarot to clarify that.
Right.
That's sort of my take on it. So that's where I'm coming from conceptually and in terms of the text and so on. So
right. The reason why I ask is that I've seen several decks, and some of them I've seen are what I consider harsh cards. It's like, okay, is there anything good going to happen here? It's like, hello, or they're very. What's the word?
There are a couple. I mean, yeah, you go into some of the swords, for example, and they can be a little rough.
It's like you're almost afraid, like, oh my God, we really want to, like, yeah.
But those I see. Okay, are they rough? Yes, but I view those as more warnings of
right. And then there's others but they're almost out. In other words, it's not even per se the swords. The actual entire deck is too dark. It's too. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, there's bad and worse and worser. It's like, okay, hello.
These aren't dark.
Is there anything like good? Yeah. Except of like, yeah. Or there's some that I've seen that are too yummy. They're nice. They're sometimes, but it's like in life, sometimes there's problems, or like you said, things that need clarification, or that you have to be like, hey, like a rough tap on the shoulder, like pay attention kind of deal. You see what I'm saying? Versus it's all, tra la 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 la. I've seen some that are just tra la 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 la, and it's like, okay, but there's gonna be times where, and I totally agree with you on the elucidation part of a tarot. Like, the answer, you just kind of like clear away, so you can get it, deal with it. Especially if it's something that you're either procrastinating on or don't want to face, or sometimes you need that push along, like, look at this maybe from this aspect, or stop dragging your ass about it, or that's my But yes, that's why I asked you about that, because obviously the inspiration as the creator is what. How can I say it? That, like I said, I've seen different interpretations, and you always have the outliers. Like I said, most of them are in there somewhere, but I like the ones that you have a mix, because that is life. That's a human condition,
Yeah, I'm hoping this comes out very balanced.
Yes. All right. Yeah. So, end of this next year, I'm sure. And you said that you're going to have a book to go with it as far as the actual deck.
Yeah. I'm I'm doing the book to go with it, and yeah, so that goes as a set, as it were.
Okay, so everything's going to come out together. Perfect. Shawn, I want to thank you so much for spending this time. It has been fantastic to talk to you because
this was great.
You know, dragons, I know there's people, everybody's got their own idea about dragons, but regardless, across the board, they're fascinating. They're fascinating, regardless of how you look at them, you know, whether you want to come down on your enemies riding a dragon, or, you know, you want to have a dragon, you know, BFF, you know, whatever your outlook is, they're fascinating. They're fascinating creatures. And again, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing when this deck and the book come out.
I will let you know.
Take care. Good luck to you. It's like I said, it's I know there's people that are going to be going, oh my God, it's going to take so long for it to be available. Because of course we're into our instant gratification. So of course, guys,
yes,
something to
be
look
patient.
forward to.
Okay. Well, you take care.
Bye, darling. Take care.
Bye.
Isn't that great? You know what? And I think, you know, we kind of like, you know, the field of dragons, depending on whether you just think of them as things that maybe you've seen in the movies, or maybe you're more into dragons because you've read a lot of stories and you're a dragon fan, or like I said, you know, you come from the school of, you know, dragons would be great in a fight, you know, that kind of thing, or like what I was referring to in like how they depicted Smog, you know. I want to sit on my mountain of gold and, you know, have this deep voice, which is great, by the way. I want to say most people at some point have been exposed to dragons in one way or another. And I think it's fascinating. Yes, it's true. I am going to have a dragon character. I foreshadowed it in one of my Sybil. I did like a 3-page thing because I wanted to set that up, like throw out that tidbit, and then but that story where that dragon character is a main character. We're talking here world building, as in that's my little chihuahua back there. She has her. Where's my evening meal? By the way, she's 15 years old. She's my old girl. She's a little chihuahua which I've taken everywhere with me. I have pictures of her coming out of a SpongeBob carry-all in front of the White House, Times Square, everywhere. I've traveled with her everywhere. Yes, that's my girl, and she's 15 years old, and she's making the where's my evening meal? Yeah. And all the other puppies roll her around. Sometimes she gets mad. A lot of her teeth are missing and her vision is not the greatest. But man, can she smell? She gets all over the place just on smell alone. That thing is still like, that sniffer is as good as it was when I got her as a puppy. But anyway, getting back to the dragon thing. You know, again, my dragon story is still, since it's a bigger, it takes more imagination juices because it's world building. It's interdimensional kind of like thing. So that there's a whole that goes into that. But yeah, you know, and I agree with her. In some cases, and I understand, dragons have been used as the villain or the Godzilla moment where everybody's going, you know, and you see all the little humans running, you know, that kind of deal. Towards versus, you know, the dragon being more nicer, you know, like as I could ride my dragon around. And then you have the stories where the dragon is actually developed more of a closer, what's the word I'm like as an even character, even though you're a dragon and you're a human, but you don't have a bridle on me and ride me around. I might let you cling to me if it's expedient because we're going somewhere, and I got wings, but, that kind of deal. I know everybody's got their, there's people going out there. But yeah, as a matter of fact, where's my dragon? Let me see. I have a stuffed dragon. Where's my stuffed dragon? Where's my, I've had a, I don't know where I have it. Back there somewhere, I have this little stuffed dragon, and I've had that stuffed dragon for like 20 years, and it's always been in my office, and I either have it in the back or on my desk, or along with my Scooby-Doo. Yes, yeah, Scooby-Doo doll that's back there, right there. My Scooby, Dave, that that's kind of my cuckoo thing. Yeah. My age, and I still have some stuffed animals because to me they're like this thing that you still have your imagination. By the way, I have a very good grip on reality, really good. But that doesn't mean that my imagination is good in where I appreciate looking at stuffed animals and doing the what if, then your imagination jumps on it and away we go. Which, by the way, I think I developed because since I was a child, I was a reader. And long before, they had Saturday morning cartoons and stuff like that, which I loved, by the way. But when you read, I mean, you have to use your imagination because what else is there to do when you read? And you, like a muscle, it develops. You unleash it, and then if you're imaginative to begin with, which I was an imaginative kid, but I think that adds a richness to our lives that hopefully you keep all through your life, because you daydream, you come up with stories, and the truth is, it helps us sometimes once you become an adult, to get you through sometimes rough times as an adult. And by this I mean that, I've spoken about it where reading or your imagination detaches you a little bit sometimes from reality. For a little bit, by the way, for a little bit, to kind of like counterbalance things in your life when maybe things are difficult, or just to pull you back and sometimes even come up with fresh ideas or different aspects, or minimize maybe the enormity of a problem, where you could detach and think about other things. And it's the richness of your imagination is what sometimes allows you, even sometimes when you go in to see a movie, like I say, sometimes, let's say, God knows there's enough movies out there that have no basis in reality, and it's like some people sometimes I've heard them critique movies. Oh, I can't believe that. It's like, okay, some movies that you have to do what I call suspend your disbelief, which is like set it apart and enjoy it. It's almost like if you suspend your disbelief, you're like doing something really bad or something wrong. No, what's wrong with that? Like I said, I have an excellent grip on reality. Really, really good. Okay, and believe it or not, I consider myself an analytical personality. But then there's the other part of me which is highly imaginative. Okay, and I'm glad to say that I've had it since I was a kid, and I've never lost it. And even though it's well delineated, like this is reality, and this is not reality. And the reason why I say that is that I know that sometimes, especially, when kids, and I want to say teenagers, sometimes do really awful things. People say, oh, well, that person, like, I want to say back in the 90s when there was Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, this kid lost the perspective, or now with the video games. You know what? I know it's to be highly imaginative, but even as a kid, I always knew what was real and what was not real. Okay? So sometimes when I hear that argument about certain teenagers, that line blurs, is that, yeah, okay, but there's other problems there in the background, up here, with this person, when that line blurs for them. Okay, in other words, that they pile on the responsibility, especially when they do something bad. I've heard, where kids will, some of these games that people die, like they don't understand the concept of death or the permanency of death. Let me tell you, if you're, I want to say as a child, unless you live really, 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 really protected, you as a child will experience death, if not of a human being, of a pet, an animal, something outside that introduces you to the concept of life ceasing, like the finality of it. Again, where you understand it, maybe not entirely, but which I think is the normal process of things as a child grows and develops. That, like, in other words, you don't expect a 2 or 3 year old to understand it. Let's say you lose a pet versus a child that's already 7, 8, 9 years old. They're going to grieve for a pet, or things of that nature, or something dies, or if you find that animal. And I'm talking here before other children have experienced the loss of a loved one. But yeah, getting back to the original point about dragons, and that I think that they offer a texture, a storyline, for the imaginative, and of course for those that like stories and movies, and I know there's a lot of dragon aficionados out there. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Stories of the Supernatural, and thanks again for being part of my audience. You're all wonderful, and I have a lot of great guests coming on. Also, make sure to look at my books. You can go to marlenepardo.com or miamighostchronicles.com, or my author profile page on Amazon at Marlene Pardo Pellicer. On there you're going to see all my books, fiction and non-fiction, etc., etc., etc. So again,